I always knew I was the afterthought. My parents never said it out loud, but they didn't need to. It was written in every decision they made. My older sister, Rachel, was the golden child. Straight A's, debate team captain, the one everyone fawned over at family gatherings. Then there was my younger brother, Adam, who had this natural charm that got him through life with minimal effort. And me? I was Sam. Just Sam. Rachel got into a prestigious university right out of high school, and my parents threw her a celebration that was bigger than some weddings I've attended. Catered food, a rented hall, even relatives from out of town. "We're just so proud," my dad kept saying, his arms slung around her like she was an Olympic medalist. Adam's path was different, but just as impressive in their eyes. He wasn't academic, but he had this way of getting opportunities handed to him, like the world bent itself to his favor. When he decided to start a business after high school, my parents funded the whole thing: loans, office space, equipment. "He's ambitious," my mom told me once, as if explaining why he deserved the support. When I got into a decent state college, I expected at least a pat on the back, maybe a family dinner to acknowledge it. Instead, I got a nod from my dad and a distracted, "Good for you, Sam," from my mom while she sorted through mail. It wasn't like I needed a parade, but the silence stung. It wasn't just the attention, it was the money too. Rachel's Ivy League tuition? Fully covered. Adam's business startup? A blank check, no questions asked. When I needed a few $1,000s for basic tools to get started in my first job after college, they acted like it was a massive inconvenience. They gave me $5,000 and made it clear it was a one-time thing. I told myself it was fine. I didn't want to depend on them anyway, but that feeling of being the least important kid in the room never went away. The divide became clearer at family dinners. Rachel would talk about her latest promotion or her European vacations with her fiancé, and Adam would chime in about how his business was expanding, how grateful he was for our parents' support. My parents would hang on their every word, their faces glowing with pride. And me? I'd sit there, silently eating, wondering if anyone even noticed I was there. One night, about a year ago, the conversation turned to Rachel's wedding plans. "It's going to be so beautiful," she said, showing off pictures of the venue. "Mom and Dad have been such a huge help. I don't know how I'd do it without them." Adam laughed, raising his glass. "They've been lifesavers for me too. I mean, I wouldn't have my business without them." I sat there, gripping my fork a little too tightly. I could feel my face heating up as the bitterness I'd been swallowing for years started bubbling to the surface. Finally, I muttered, "Must be nice." The room fell silent. Rachel stopped mid-sentence and turned to me, her smile frozen in place. "What's that supposed to mean?" I looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time that evening. "It means not all of us get the red carpet treatment. Some of us have to figure things out on our own." Adam rolled his eyes. "Here we go," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Mom and Dad helped you too, Sam. Don't act like you got nothing." "Helped me?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You think $5,000 for work tools is the same as paying for college, funding a business, or dropping 6 figures on a wedding? It's not even close." My mom, ever the peacemaker, held up her hands. "Sam, that's not fair. We've always tried to give you what you needed." "No, you gave me the bare minimum so you could say you did something," I shot back. "It's not the same." My dad sighed, shaking his head. "You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. We gave you what we thought was fair." "Fair?" I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You have no idea what fair looks like. You've been bending over backward for Rachel and Adam my whole life, and I'm just there. Invisible." I walked out before anyone could respond, slamming the door behind me. The cool night air hit my face as I stormed down the driveway, my heart pounding. I didn't have a plan, didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay in that house another second. For years, I'd convinced myself that I was being too sensitive, that maybe I just wasn't good enough to deserve the same attention or support. But that night, as I walked aimlessly through my neighborhood, I realized I wasn't the problem. I wasn't imagining the imbalance. It was real, and I was done pretending it didn't matter. I walked for what felt like hours that night. The streets were quiet, the kind of eerie stillness that makes your own thoughts feel louder. I kept replaying the dinner in my head, the way Rachel had looked at me like I was crazy, the way Adam brushed me off, the way my parents acted like I was overreacting. My anger came in waves, but underneath it was something worse: exhaustion. I was so tired of feeling like I had to fight just to be noticed. Eventually, I ended up at a park I used to visit as a kid. It was mostly empty, just a couple of teenagers sitting on a bench under a street lamp. I found a spot farther away, near the swings, and sat down, staring at the ground. I wasn't sure how long I stayed there, but by the time I checked my phone, it was past midnight. There were texts from my mom and Rachel. My mom's message was predictable: "Please come back, Sam. Let's talk this out." Rachel's was less subtle: "What the hell was that about? You ruined dinner." I didn't respond. What was the point? Talking never fixed anything with my family. It always ended the same way: me being told I was too sensitive or dramatic, and them continuing on like nothing happened. As I sat there, I started thinking about all the times I'd let things slide. The times I'd swallowed my feelings because I didn't want to cause a scene or make them uncomfortable. Like when my parents refused to help with my rent after college because they were stretched thin from helping Rachel with her down payment. Or when they skipped my birthday dinner one year to fly out and visit Adam because he needed support. The pattern was clear. I wasn't a priority. I never had been. The next morning, I woke up in my apartment feeling drained. I had barely slept, and my mind was still racing. I thought about calling a friend or venting online, but something stopped me. This wasn't just about one bad dinner or a single argument. It was about years of feeling like I didn't belong in my own family. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted change. That's when it hit me. They needed to see what I'd been dealing with. Not just hear it, but see it laid out plainly, in a way they couldn't dismiss as overreacting. I spent the rest of the day digging through old emails, receipts, and messages. I found the tuition bills my parents had paid for Rachel, the congratulatory emails from my mom about Adam's business milestones, even the text where my dad told me they couldn't help with rent because they'd already spent too much on Rachel that year. The deeper I dug, the angrier I got. It wasn't just the big things. It was the small, constant reminders that I was always last on their list. Like the time they gave Rachel a brand new laptop, just because, while I had to save for months to replace mine when it broke. Or how they still sent Adam money to get through a rough patch, even though he was married and running a successful business. By the time I finished organizing everything, I had a full picture of just how wide the gap was between me and my siblings. I wasn't imagining it. The proof was right there in black and white. The question was, what was I going to do with it? I considered calling another family meeting, or sending them a long email with everything laid out. But the idea of sitting in that living room again, watching them try to justify or downplay everything, made my stomach turn. I wanted them to listen, but I also wanted them to feel what I'd felt all these years, to sit with the weight of it. I decided to wait. I wasn't ready to confront them again. Not yet. For now, I just needed to let it all sink in. The next few days were quiet. My mom sent a couple more texts, but I didn't reply. Rachel tried calling once, but I ignored it. Adam, unsurprisingly, stayed silent. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control, not of them, but of myself. I didn't owe them an explanation for my silence. I didn't have to rush to smooth things over just because they were uncomfortable, but I knew the silence wouldn't last forever. Eventually, I'd have to decide what came next. A few weeks passed, and the dust from that disastrous dinner seemed to settle, at least for them. My mom sent her usual checking-in texts every few days, keeping them vague and casual. "Hi, Sam. Hope you're doing okay. Let us know if you'd like to come by for dinner this weekend." It was her way of pretending nothing had happened, like everything could go back to normal if she ignored it long enough. Rachel tried harder. She texted me more than usual, with messages like, "Thinking about what you said at dinner. Let's talk when you're ready." Part of me appreciated her efforts, but I couldn't help feeling like they were more about easing her guilt than actually understanding where I was coming from. Adam? Total radio silence. Not a single text, call, or attempt to engage. Classic Adam. I stayed quiet, focusing on work and my own routines. I hadn't fully decided how to handle things, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to sweep it under the rug just to keep the peace. Then, one afternoon, Rachel called. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey, Sam," she said, her voice cautious, like she was testing the waters. "Hey," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner," she began. "I didn't realize you felt that way, and honestly, I feel awful that I didn't notice before." I didn't respond right away. I could hear the guilt in her voice, but I wasn't sure if it was genuine or just an attempt to smooth things over. "Okay," I said finally. "So now you know. What are you going to do about it?" Rachel hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. I want us to have a better relationship. I don't want you to feel like I've been ignoring you or taking things for granted." "You weren't just ignoring me," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You were benefiting from it. You got everything handed to you while I was left to figure things out on my own. And you didn't care because it didn't affect you." "That's not fair," she said, sounding defensive now. "I didn't ask Mom and Dad to treat us differently. It's not my fault they chose to help me more." "No, but you didn't stop them either," I countered. "You didn't question why I wasn't getting the same support or why I was always the one left out. You just went along with it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Rachel sighed. "You're right. I should have said something. I should have been more aware. I'm sorry, Sam." Her apology caught me off guard. It wasn't defensive or filled with excuses. It was just honest. I wasn't sure how to respond. "Thanks," I said finally. "But it's going to take more than an apology to fix this." "I know," she said. "I want to fix it, though. Just tell me what I can do." "Start by listening," I said. "Actually listen when I tell you how I feel, instead of brushing it off or trying to defend yourself. That's the first step." "Okay," Rachel said quietly. "I'll try." The conversation ended on an awkward but hopeful note. It wasn't perfect, but it was more than I'd expected from her. A few days later, my mom called. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. "Hi, Sam," she said, her tone hesitant. "I was wondering if you'd come over for dinner this weekend. Just you, me, and your dad. We'd like to talk." "About what?" I asked, though I already had an idea. "About what happened at Rachel's birthday," she said. "And everything else. We want to understand better, Sam. We really do." I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to say no, to tell them I was done trying to explain myself to people who never seemed to care. But another part of me, the one that still held out hope for something better, wanted to give them a chance. "Fine," I said finally. "But if it turns into you making excuses, I'm leaving." "It won't," she promised. "We just want to hear you out." When Saturday rolled around, I felt a mix of nerves and dread as I drove to their house. The last time I'd been there, I'd walked out in a rage. Now I was walking back in, not sure what to expect. My mom greeted me at the door, her smile tight and unsure. "Thanks for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. Inside, my dad was sitting at the dining table, his usual confident demeanor replaced with something softer, almost hesitant. "Hey, Sam," he said, giving me a small nod. I sat down, my hands resting on my knees. "So, what's this about?" My dad cleared his throat. "We've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began. "About how we've treated you compared to Rachel and Adam. And you were right. We weren't fair to you." I blinked, surprised by the bluntness of his admission. "Okay," I said cautiously. "We thought we were doing what was best at the time," my mom added, her voice trembling slightly. "But we see now how much we hurt you. That was never our intention, Sam." Their words hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. For years, I'd wanted them to acknowledge the imbalance, to admit that they'd treated me differently. Now that they were saying it, I didn't know how to feel. "We don't expect you to forgive us overnight," my dad continued, "but we want to make things right. We just don't know how." For a moment, I sat there in silence, trying to process what they were saying. Finally, I spoke. "It's not about the money," I said quietly. "It's about feeling like I didn't matter as much as Rachel and Adam. Like I was always an afterthought." My mom wiped at her eyes, and my dad nodded solemnly. "We get that now," he said. We can't change the past, but we want to do better moving forward. If you'll let us. Their sincerity caught me off guard. I didn't know if I could trust it yet, but it felt like a start. We'll see, I said finally. It's going to take time. They both nodded, and for the first time in years, I felt like they were actually listening. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a step. And for now, that was enough. The next few weeks felt tentative. My parents called a little more often, though the conversations were careful, almost scripted. My mom would ask how work was going or if I needed anything, and my dad would occasionally chime in with questions about my plans. It was clear they were trying, but it still felt like they were walking on eggshells. I wasn't sure if it was because they didn't want to upset me, or because they weren't sure how to act now that the usual dynamic had been flipped on its head. Rachel, on the other hand, was persistent. She texted every few days and invited me over for coffee or lunch. At first, I kept my distance, unsure if her intentions were genuine or just another way to ease her conscience. But eventually, I agreed to meet her. I figured if she was putting in the effort, the least I could do was see where it led. When I arrived at her house, she greeted me with an awkward hug. "Thanks for coming," she said, leading me to the kitchen. Her kids were at school, and the house was unusually quiet. We sat at the table, sipping coffee in an uneasy silence until she finally broke it. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Sam. About how I've benefited from the way Mom and Dad treated us." I raised an eyebrow, waiting to see where she was going with this. "I never saw it before," she continued. "I mean, I always knew they helped me out a lot, but I didn't realize how much it cost you. I didn't think about what it must have been like to be on the outside of all that." Her words caught me off guard. I'd expected her to acknowledge the imbalance, sure, but hearing her admit she hadn't considered how it felt for me was something else. "So now you see it," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "What are you going to do about it?" Rachel sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know. I can't go back and change things, but I want to do better now. I want us to have a real relationship, not just this awkward thing we've had for years." I studied her face, searching for any hint of insincerity, but she seemed genuine. "It's not going to be easy," I said. "You can't just say you're sorry and expect everything to be fine." "I know," she said quickly, "but I'm willing to do the work if you are." I nodded, letting her words sink in. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's see if you mean it." It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it felt like a start. Meanwhile, Adam remained a complete non-factor. I hadn't heard a word from him since the dinner, and honestly, I didn't expect to. He'd always been the type to avoid conflict, preferring to pretend everything was fine rather than deal with uncomfortable truths. At first, his silence bothered me. I wanted him to acknowledge what had been said, to admit that he'd benefited from our parents' favoritism just as much as Rachel. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't need him to. If he wasn't willing to engage, that was on him. My parents, to their credit, were trying harder than I'd expected. My mom called one evening and asked if she could come over to visit. "I just want to spend some time with you," she said. When she showed up, she brought a tin of cookies, something she used to do when I was a kid. It felt strange, almost like she was trying to recapture something that had been lost years ago. We sat in my living room, and for the first time, she asked about my life in a way that felt genuine. She wanted to know about my work, my friends, even my hobbies. "I wish I'd done this more when you were younger," she said suddenly, her voice tinged with regret. "I was so caught up in making sure Rachel and Adam were okay that I didn't stop to think about what you needed." Her words hit harder than I expected. "It wasn't just about what I needed," I said quietly. "It was about feeling like I mattered at all." "You do matter," she said, her voice cracking. "I know it doesn't mean much now, but I'm so sorry for how we made you feel. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." For the first time in years, I felt like she was really hearing me. It didn't erase everything, but it was a start. Later that week, my dad called. He didn't usually reach out on his own, so I was surprised when his name popped up on my phone. "Hey, Sam," he said. "You got a minute?" "Sure," I said, though I wasn't sure what to expect. "I've been thinking about our talk," he began, his tone awkward but sincere. "About what you said, how you felt invisible. I'm sorry." I don't have an excuse for it. I wish I'd done better by you. I didn't know what to say. My dad wasn't the kind of person who apologized easily, so hearing him say those words felt surreal. I can't go back and fix things, he continued, but I want you to know I'm proud of you, Sam, for everything you've done on your own. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. His words caught me off guard. For years, I'd convinced myself I didn't need his approval, but hearing it now stirred something in me. Thanks, Dad, I said, my voice softer than I intended. That night, I sat in my apartment, thinking about the shifts in my family. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't happening quickly, but it felt like they were trying. For the first time, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The weeks that followed felt like walking on uneven ground. My parents were trying harder than they ever had, but the changes were small, tentative, and often clumsy. My mom would text me with updates about their lives, things she'd never bothered to share before. Your dad tried making lasagna tonight, one text read. It was terrible, but I appreciate the effort. She also started asking questions that felt more personal, like, how's your stress level at work? Are you sleeping okay? My dad, though less vocal, showed effort in his own way. One weekend, he called out of the blue and asked if I wanted to grab lunch. The invitation startled me. It was so unlike him. I agreed, and we ended up at a diner we used to go to when I was a kid. Over burgers and coffee, he told me about the little repairs he'd been doing around the house, even laughing about how a simple leaky faucet had turned into a full-day project. It was a surprisingly easy conversation, but I could feel him circling something heavier. Finally, he put down his fork and looked at me, his expression serious. You know, Sam, he said, I've been thinking a lot about how we handled things when you were growing up. How we handled you. I froze, not sure where he was going with this. I think we got it wrong, he continued. We thought we were doing what was best, helping Rachel and Adam because they asked for it, because it seemed like they needed it. But in doing that, we overlooked you. And that wasn't fair. Hearing him admit that felt like someone had turned on a light in a dark room. For years, I'd been carrying the weight of feeling invisible, and now, here he was, acknowledging it in a way that felt real. I appreciate you saying that, I said, keeping my voice steady. But it's going to take time to rebuild things. It's not just about the past. It's about what happens from here. I understand, he said, nodding. I just want you to know I'm proud of you, Sam. You've done so much on your own, and you've done it well. Those words stayed with me long after we left the diner. For so long, I'd convinced myself that I didn't need my parents' validation, but hearing it now felt strangely comforting. Meanwhile, Rachel continued her efforts to repair our relationship. She invited me over for dinner again, and this time, it felt less forced. Her husband was there, but he mostly stayed out of the way, letting us talk. At one point, Rachel said, I've been thinking about how to make things more balanced between us. I know I can't change what Mom and Dad did, but I can do better myself. How? I asked, genuinely curious. I want to support you the way they supported me, she said. Whether it's helping you with something for work or just being there when you need someone to talk to, I want to be that for you. It was a nice sentiment, but part of me couldn't help feeling skeptical. That's a good start, I said cautiously. But it's not just about what you can give me. It's about recognizing that things weren't okay before. You don't have to fix it all, Rachel. Just don't ignore it. She nodded, looking thoughtful. I won't, she said quietly. Adam, however, remained a sore point. He hadn't reached out once, and at family gatherings, he acted like nothing had happened. His casual indifference irritated me more than I cared to admit. One evening, after dinner at my parents' house, I decided to confront him. As he was grabbing his coat, I pulled him aside. Hey, Adam, can we talk for a minute? He looked at me, surprised. Sure. What's up? You haven't said a word to me since that night at Rachel's birthday, I said bluntly. I know you heard what I said. Are you really just going to pretend none of it matters? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, Sam, I don't know what you want me to say. Yeah, Mom and Dad helped me a lot. I'm grateful for that, but it's not like I asked them to treat you differently. You didn't ask, I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. But you benefited from it, and you never once stopped to question it. That's the problem, Adam. You didn't care because it worked out for you. He frowned, shifting uncomfortably. What do you want me to do? Apologize for their choices? I want you to acknowledge it, I said. Acknowledge that it wasn't fair, and that you were okay with it because it didn't affect you. He hesitated, then said, Fine. It wasn't fair. But I don't know how to fix it, Sam. What's done is done. Maybe you can't fix it, I said. But pretending it never happened isn't the answer. He nodded reluctantly, muttering, Fair enough, before walking out the door. It wasn't the resolution I'd hoped for, but it was something. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel a cautious sense of progress. My parents weren't perfect, but they were making an effort to be more present and supportive. Rachel and I were slowly rebuilding our relationship, and even Adam seemed to soften a little, though he kept his distance. For the first time in a long time, it felt like my family was trying to meet me halfway. It wasn't perfect, and it might never be, but it was better than the silence I'd lived with for so many years. And for now, that was enough. Over the next year, my family and I settled into a new kind of normal. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, old habits creeping back in, and times when I questioned if things would ever truly feel right. But there was progress. My parents were more present than they'd ever been. My mom started calling just to chat, not because she needed something or wanted to guilt me into visiting. My dad, while still reserved, had moments where he surprised me. One weekend, he showed up at my place unannounced, holding a toolbox. What's this? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You mentioned your sink's been leaking, he said gruffly. Thought I'd help you fix it. It was such a small gesture, but it meant more than I could say. Growing up, he'd been the kind of dad who'd fix everything for Rachel and Adam, but when it came to me, I was left to figure it out on my own. Seeing him make the effort now felt like he was trying to rewrite some of that history, even if he didn't know how to say it out loud. Rachel continued to make good on her promise to be more supportive. She invited me over regularly, and the conversations we had felt genuine for the first time in years. We talked about things beyond surface-level updates. Our insecurities, our frustrations, even our childhood. I used to hate the pressure they put on me, she admitted one evening, nursing a glass of wine. I felt like I couldn't mess up because they'd invested so much in me. But I never realized that while I was struggling with that, you were being completely ignored. I'm sorry, Sam. I really am. Hearing her say that didn't erase the resentment I'd felt for so long, but it softened something in me. For the first time, I felt like she saw me as more than just her little brother who had it all together. Adam remained the wild card. He didn't say much during family gatherings, but he wasn't hostile either. One night, after a particularly quiet dinner at Rachel's house, he caught me as I was leaving. Hey, Sam, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Can I talk to you for a second? I turned, surprised. Sure. What's up? He shifted awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. I've been thinking about what you said, about how I benefited from everything. And you're right. I didn't question it because it worked for me. That wasn't fair to you, and I'm sorry. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Of all the people in my family, Adam was the one I'd expected to stay silent forever. Hearing him apologize, even if it was a year late, felt like a weight I didn't realize I was carrying had finally been lifted. Thanks, I said simply. That means a lot. He nodded, looking relieved. I know I can't change the past, but if there's ever anything I can do, just let me know. I will, I said. But honestly, just acknowledging it is a good start. After that conversation, things with Adam didn't magically become perfect, but there was an unspoken understanding between us that hadn't been there before. As for me, I started focusing more on my own life. For so long, I'd let my family's dynamics define how I saw myself. Always the outsider. Always the one who didn't measure up. But as they began to change, I realized I didn't need their approval to feel whole. I'd built a life for myself, one I was proud of, and that was enough. The final turning point came during a dinner at my parents' new house. They'd sold the family home and downsized, which felt symbolic in a way, like they were letting go of the old patterns and trying to start fresh. As we sat around the table, Rachel shared a funny story about her kids, and Adam talked about a trip he was planning with his wife. My mom asked me how my latest project at work was going, and for once, everyone stopped to listen. It's going well, I said, surprised by how natural it felt to be part of the conversation. We just landed a big client, so things are busy, but it's a good kind of busy. That's amazing, my dad said, his voice filled with genuine pride. You've done so much, Sam. We're really proud of you. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an afterthought. I wasn't just the quiet one at the table or the sibling who had to figure it all out alone. I was part of the family, flawed, complicated, but finally seen. As I left that night, walking out into the crisp evening air, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Things still weren't perfect, and maybe they never would be, but they were better. And sometimes, better is enough.